Hey there everyone, welcome back. I've got a different kind of video tutorial today. Altenew's outline stamps are perfect for embroidered crafts. In this video, I have 6 essential embroidery stitches you need to start your first embroidery project. First off, let's go through the very basic materials you need to start using your Altenew stamps with embroidery. You need an embroidery hoop. This will keep your fabric of choice stretched while working, opening the weave of the fabric for the needle and embroidery floss. As for the floss, I'm using DMC floss. I'll be using all 6 strands and try my best to show the colors I picked for my project. DMC recommends a 22 gauge needle when working with 6 strands, so that's the needle size I have. Finally, I have a cut of light gray fabric. Mine is cut to about 11 inches square because I plan on using this finished panel for a 10-inch pillow form. I'm using canvas fabric because it's sturdy. I don't recommend being frugal with fabric and using t-shirts or polyester blends. It's too stretchy for this project and you'll end up with uneven stitching. So really those are the 4 basics. An embroidery hoop stand or holder is a great tool for beginners since it frees up your non-dominant hand, but it isn't entirely essential. Before I start stitching anything, I'm planning the arrangements I want on my fabric. I can do this by tracing the inner diameter of my embroidery hoop onto scrap paper. Then I can stamp my arrangements onto the scrap paper. This will help give me an idea where all my images will sit spatially. If you have more of a sophisticated fabric crafting stash, you may have carbon paper or a fabric marking pen. These are also great alternatives to transferring your images to fabric, but I have neither of those items. What I did instead was stamp directly onto my fabric. My stamp choices are deliberate for my project. I went through my Altenew stamp stash to find floral images with a single row of petals. These images have petals that don't overlap or overlap very minimally. These are the easiest kind of flower to embroider. Here is Paint a Flower China Rose. This flower is an excellent example of a single row of petals. I'll use this as my main flower image. The supporting foliage is also great because there isn't a lot of overlap. To support this main flower, I have other images from Wispy Joy Stamp Set and Wild and Free Stamp Set. Again, I'm looking at the outline images of all 3 of these stamp sets. I think these all contain very beginner-friendly embroidery motifs. So like I mentioned earlier, you can plan your arrangement on your scrap piece of cardstock and give yourself an idea where all your images will fit spatially. Or if you're feeling confident, you may just stamp directly onto your fabric. I changed my mind on my original layout several times throughout the course of this embroidery project, but you can use any of Altenew's dye inks to stamp onto your fabric. I used Industrial Diamond from the Rock Collection Mini Ink Cube set because it showed up on camera better than Silverstone, but you can use whichever ink that will give you a faint outline but is still visible for your lighting situation and crafting materials. In this Wispy Joy flower, we will work through the very important Satin Stitch. This stitch is important for filling in large open areas of the petals and gives the impression of petal veining. This stitch is the most challenging of all in my opinion, but I have a little trick to share when filling in irregular petals like these. Starting from the most background petal, I like to make a very simple skeleton. The skeleton gives me a linear direction to where my stitches should face and makes the end result more uniform. I'll bring my needle up through the tip of the petal and use a section of the thread to draw a line through the center of the petal. I'll finish the straight stitch by inserting the needle back into the fabric and at the base or center of the flower. This series of straight stitches fill in the petal, giving the satin stitch. To avoid added bulk to the petal, I'm creating varying lengths of straight stitches. If I notice a satin stitch will overlap another one, I'll insert my needle to the back of my work in the middle of the petal rather than at the base. I'll continue around each petal, working from background to foreground until I've finished the flower. To bind off the thread, I'm making a very short straight stitch in an inconspicuous area, such as the center of the flower. Now that the petals are done, we can work on the center of the flower. This next stitch requires 12 strands of thread, so you'll double the thread onto your needle. This puffed satin stitch is just like the original satin stitch, but the floss does not lay flat. So this is great for filling in flower centers like the pistil. So instead of pulling the satin stitches tight, I'm leaving a lot of slack in the thread on the front side. Every 4 stitches or so, I'll use the needle to massage the stitches up, giving me a more uniform puff throughout the flower center. And then once I've filled in the space, I'll bind off my thread again. We will come back to this flower that we were just working on and move on to another variation of straight stitches. Working up leaves is so easy with the Fishbone Stitch. With my choice of thread and all 6 strands, I'm starting at the very tip of the leaf. We will call this point A. Point B will be at the start of the stem, and I'll push my needle through point B. Point C will be immediately at the right side of point A, following the outline of the leaf image. I'll bring the thread through my work slightly to the left of point B. Then immediately on the left side of point A, I'll bring my needle up to create point D. I'll finish this round of Fishbone Stitch by bringing the thread through my work slightly to the right and down of point B. I'll work down the entire leaf image to the base of the flower following this pattern. The end result is a filled leaf with a completed stem. Toward the base of the leaf, you can fill in the rest of the image with Satin Stitch, keeping the stitches parallel to maintain the Fishbone Stitch appearance. To further embellish this leaf, you can add a contrasting vein to the leaf. In order to do that, I recommend the stem stitch. This is similar to a back stitch, but there is a bias or twist in the line. Start with a regular straight stitch along the center of the leaf. Then halfway through the stitch on either side, come from the back of the stitch and work the thread to the back, following the same stitch length as the previous straight stitch. It's important to not snag the yarn. You're working the thread slightly next to the previous stitch. Work your way down the leaf to complete the vein. You can do this for leaf clusters too, as shown with this lighter green bundle. And then to finish the leaves, you can add straight stitches on top of the fishbone pattern to give more veining to the leaf, following the parallel lines to the previous fishbone pattern. Alright, moving back to flowers, I love these lazy daisy motifs to fill in smaller but open areas of your fabric. I'm using a 6-strand floss, and I'll start by bringing the thread up through point A and working the stitch into point B immediately next to point A. Before pulling the stitch tight, I'm going to create a small loop. I'll work point C into the tip of the daisy petal, and loop the thread between point A and point B around it. Bring the needle into the work at point D, immediately above and as close to point C. This will secure the loop to the fabric, creating one petal. And now all you have to do is repeat this motif for as many petals as you have in your daisy. There is one more stitch to finish off this embroidery project. The French knot is a beautiful way to add stamens to your flowers. That's this little circular loop in the center of this coral flower. Making these stitches is easier if you have both hands to manipulate the thread. I'm using enchanted gold metallic thread from Altenew to add these embroidered details, and I'm doubling the thread on my needle. Start by bringing the needle up and through the center of the flower. Then with the thread closest to the fabric, loop the thread 3 times around the needle, pulling tight. With the 3 loops on the needle and still pulling the thread tight, insert the needle immediately adjacent to the entry point on the fabric and pull the needle to the back of the work. Fill in all the anthers on your flower with the French knots and bind off your thread. So that finishes this very basic overview of embroidery stitches with your Altenew stamps. We covered satin, straight, stem, puffy satin, fishbone, lazy daisy, and French knots. 7 essential stitches to start your first embroidery project with the help of Altenew's beautiful floral stamps. Now you can display this embroidered project on the loop or use it in any home decor project. My series encourages you to shop your existing Altenew stash and rekindle their love with newer releases. Perfect Pairings with Jaycee airs on the Altenew channel every second and fourth Sunday of the month. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for tuning in to this perfect pairing episode with me, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hello crafters, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. Thanks for watching!